Hey, and welcome back to another Revit video. In this video, we're going to look at making a schedule out of these, what you might call massing floors, massing elements, to create a master plan and be able to track things and see updates in real time. So if at any point in this video you happen to learn something, please demolish that like button. It really helps me out quite a lot. And I will say before we get into it, this is considered to be part 2 of this video series, and what we're doing here is basically starting with a massing and in an attempt to get an idea of how these masses, how these buildings, garages, whatever they might be, whatever you determine them to be, how they end up on the site, how much area they take up, the data behind that, everything like that. So in part 1 we spent time building these in a certain way so that we can now here in part 2 schedule them out and receive data, and so that whenever we do end up ultimately continuing to manipulate them, we see all of that data update in real time. Like, that's the whole point here. We want to be able to see this update in real time to get an idea of where we are as we make changes. So here we are. If you are not familiar with what you see or anything that we're going through in this video as far as parameters, this or that, check out part 1. It'll really help. It's not that complicated, but it would have got you to this point. So the difference between the end of part 1 and here is that I made the exact site and everything a little bit larger. So we have these 3 properties because we're dealing with not just a few hundred square feet, which I was working with before, but we've got full sites here, and these sites are much larger than before. So that's all that matters. Things will look a bit different, but everything is the exact same. It's just a bit larger. Okay, getting into it now. So we've got basically all of our data here. And if I look at just some of these floors, we can see, yeah, we've got all of the data that we need to see as far as, what property is a part of and what building it's a part of. And this is the real basics of how we're going to start this schedule. So let's go ahead and go to view because we want to make a schedule. We'll go to schedule here. And this is going to be a floor schedule specifically because all we made and everything you see here that we're going to schedule is going to be a floor. Now, I don't want to call it floor schedule. I mean, we can just call it massing. That's fine. That'll work for now. And so it is a floor schedule. Great. And so, of course, naturally, we get all the information that we have associated to the category here, floors. That's fine. But what do we actually care about? Well, we definitely care about the area. Like, that's one of the primary things that we care about. What else do we care about? Well, in fact, we care about the type because the type is literally the names of these floors that we made. So we actually care about the type, and it just so happens that we made parameters called property and building that are associated to floors so we can use them specifically for sorting. So let's go ahead and add those in. So I come back to the top, there it is, building. Pull that in, and then finally property. Cool. So we have all this here, and what do we do with this now? Well, I can reorder this however I want. My guess is that this will be the way I want it to be, but you can always come back and edit this later. So at this point, I'm just going to click OK, and we're going to get a lot of information. Most of this is, obviously useful information, but at the end of the day, do we want to present it like this? No, we don't. I'll actually zoom in here so we can see this a bit better. What are we looking at? Well, we're looking at literally all of the floors, all the data from all of our floors, and we're getting the area, so that's cool. So let's come in here and start sorting things. Well, I want to first sort by property, and I'll do this step by step so you can get an idea of what's happening. We first sorted by property there. Now, I don't need to actually see the property, like the actual property tab here, so I can come over here to formatting and then hide that. Now, if I hide it, it's nowhere, but until I make it a header, it's nowhere. So I make it a header, and for that reason, we can get this. Look at this. So this is already really close to what we want. So we have property 1, and we have everything under property 1, and then property 2. Cool. Now, just for me, I like to add a blank line under some of these categories, really split it up a bit. But besides that, we then probably want to sort it by building, at least, just a basic idea here. So we can see, look, we have property 1, then we've got garage, and then office 1 and 1. Obviously, this is associated with property 1. Cool. And then all the areas, whatever. At the end of the day, these types may not help us so much to be seen, but nonetheless, they're there for now. Let's go now back here and kind of like we did before, I don't necessarily need to see garage one, garage one, garage. I don't need to see all that. So I kind of just want to make these a header, and then just like we did with the property, go ahead and hide that because that's fine. And so look at this now. So under property one, we have the garage. You could just think of it as the garage because there's garage one, and then office one. So all the floors that are associated to garage one, and then all the floors that are associated to the office above. I think this is the information that we are starting to see is what we need. Basically, the presentation of the data, because we've had the data all along. It's just how do we want to present it? Now, there's a couple of things that we can go. We can itemize every instance, or we cannot, because do we need to see all of these? That's kind of up to you. That it really is up to you. I'm at this point, you do what you want, obviously. So press OK, and this is what we get. Okay, well, this varies. Now, this is where it's like, do we actually need to see this type? Like, I don't think we do. So I can highlight this and then just hide it. Now, is this the data we're looking for? It is, but is this all the data we're looking for? No, we can get some more out of this. And so what do we want to do? Well, what we talked about in the first video was that we actually have, there's essentially levels to this. And there's a number to that, obviously, but it's who knows what those are. Yeah, obviously we can look here and count, but we don't want to have to do that. We want the schedule to be able to tell us that. So how can we do that? Well, we can simply have it count for us. That's definitely one thing that we can do. And that makes it easy because the schedule is really good at counting. And besides that, it can add up areas and everything like that. So as far as the height goes, it's in a similar way that we're going to basically count the number of floors, but we're also going to get, the height, the complete height, whatever. And so if I click on this floor by, for an example, I can come down here, and here is a lot of the data that we want to use. And so obviously perimeter, I don't really care about. Area, that's very important. Volume, not so much. Elevation at top, I don't know, not that at all. Elevation at bottom, no, none of this is really helpful, but the bottom here is the thickness. Now, if you remember from the last video, I made this specifically one piece here, one layer. Its structure, it's 21 feet. It's the height of the whole level. So that data can be appropriately leveraged to give us the height. So this thickness is literally the height that we want. That is the height of the level. And that applies just to any of these other floors. And this, see this one here, 15. You can see the elevation at top and bottom. We don't want to deal with that at all. Now, we could technically come to the top and say, ooh, there it is, 126. That works pretty easy, but that's not something we can easily schedule. It's in the schedule in a way, but it's not something that we can easily schedule. So what do we do? Well, let's come over here and look for something about thickness. Well, it just so happens that there is no thickness here, but what we do have is something called default thickness. Now, this just so happens to be basically the same thing, and we can press OK, and we see obviously varies. Of course, we know that it varies, and it varies because it's pulling multiple types of one building that have different level heights or different floor depths, or however you want to word that. And so I can come over here to default thickness. And I know it's going to say varies because obviously it varies, and that's okay. But what we can do is come over here and calculate totals. Now I want to do the exact same thing with the area because obviously we want to see the totals of the area, and we press OK. And then look at this. This is exactly what I'm looking for. And so what do we have here? Well, we literally have the totals, basically all the totals of all of the levels, or in this case, all of the floors that are the levels. So just like we saw before, if I come back to this building and I query this top floor, I can see, look, the elevation at top is 126 feet. And if I come back here, I can see, well, look at that. Office 1 is 126 feet tall. That is very interesting, and I like that a lot. That's helping quite a bit. Okay, so look at this with areas. Now, I don't want areas presented this way, but I have everything that I need to as far as like the areas. Something else that I'm noticing now is we might want to rename this to height because that's exactly what this is. And then obviously that's area. Cool. I don't necessarily want the area presented that way, but let's go through how we might change that. Come over here to area in the schedule and then field format. And I don't want to use the project settings because I don't like them. I don't like what I see. So we want it in square feet. Okay. we want 0 decimal places. In fact, I want to be a little less precise, just like to the nearest 10. I want to, of course, use digit grouping, which means I'll get a comma as soon as it hits the thousands. And I'll click OK. And look at that. That is some great stuff. I like this a lot. And so what is this really doing for us? This is telling us that we have all of our areas per each building and then for the property. So let's come over here and do one more thing. I want to calculate the totals for specifically the property. So like I want to see the totals of the area. At least I'm worried about the area. So let's press OK and look at this. Now, this isn't helping me so much because this is telling me that this is the total height of the property when in reality that's not. I know that, and so that's just something to be aware of. Obviously it isn't because I have the garage and the office like adjacent to each other. They're detached, or at least they're not stacking. Whereas property 2, they are stacking, and so this does help me a lot. If we come back and see property 1, they're obviously not stacking, whereas 2, they are clearly stacking, and that's helping me quite a lot. If I query this at the top, I can see, look, there it is, elevation top 151. And so my total height there is at 151. Now, these areas are great because what is this doing? This is giving me the total area of in square footage that is on each one of those properties. That's really, really good information to have. So this is pretty good, and I'm happy with this. It's not like everything in the world that I might have wanted to see, but it is something. It's pretty good. If you wanted to see the exact number of levels, the quickest way probably is to itemize every instance, and we literally get the count, and it's not visible count, but you can clearly see the count while we still maintain the totals here. It's kind of up to you. I kind of prefer it the other way because I do end up getting the totals added up for me there, and I can basically visually see how many levels that I'm dealing with. It's kind of simple enough, unless it's an absurd number of levels, which maybe you might want to see the number scheduled. So with that, I'm actually going to duplicate this schedule. So let's go to here, schedules, and duplicate this. And I want to duplicate this and call it property or properties, because ultimately what I'm going to do is look at each property specifically, and as opposed to just looking at the massing like per property. So we're going to look at all the properties. So before I do any of that, I actually need to make floors, and because of that, I'm going to end up making a new floor type. And so I'll duplicate this one, and I'm going to call this property. That's simple enough. Okay. And I don't really care how thick this is. That's really not that important to me because I just want it to be covering my actual properties. So if I come to the site here, I can see my properties are here. There's one. I'm going to do the exact same thing for the second property right there. And then finally, one more time for the third property. Here, 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 and here. So what we have now is if I go into 3D, we've got my floors, and I'm going to put this, make sure that they're associated to level ground or just the ground, because clearly we want them on the ground. So what is this doing for us? Well, I need to actually fill in my data, my properties, of course. So this is going to be property 1, like hello, obviously. And we'll do the same thing here for 2. You guessed it. This will be the second property right here, property 2. And then finally, property 3 right here. We don't need to worry about buildings because they're just the properties, and that's what we care about. So let's go to our properties. And I don't want to see all of this, obviously, because this is just the properties we're looking at, so we need to filter. So I'm going to filter this specifically by property, and that needs to basically have some sort of a value, and it just needs to have a value. It has value there, so basically nothing will change here, of course. But then this is where we get into the specifics of I want my type to equal the property. Like I literally only want to look at those 3. And so this is what happens. Look, my 1, 2, 3. Again, I don't care about the height, so I will hide this. So we have our areas. This is great. This is essentially everything that I need, at least to start manipulating the data at this point. So with this, what I can do is easily calculate the area, the acreage, and I can go to fields, and if you were to combine parameters, I would take two of these parameters and basically push them together and display whatever data they have to display, but then just as one single cell. Now that's helpful, but that's not what I'm looking to do here, because what I'm trying to do is make a calculated parameter, basically taking a parameter that I have and altering that with a formula or something like that to give me some sort of a new parameter, which is going to be calculated. And I can find that here by that fx, which is what we're used to seeing for evaluating some sort of a function. So what do I want to call this? Well, let's call this acreage. That makes a lot of sense. And so how do we determine that? Well, it is as simple as typing in. Now, if I were going to do a percentage, I could do this way, and it's just pulling the different parameters that I have in my schedule to work with. And it could be a percentage of area or default thickness by the property. These don't work because they're text, obviously. So I don't want to do percentage at all. I want to import this myself, type it in myself. So with formula, I can literally type in the parameters that I see above in my actual schedule, or I can click them here if I don't want to type them in. It'll basically just type it in for you, which do what you want. It's easy. You won't mess it up this way, at least. So how do we calculate the total acreage? Well, we have to know the square footage of the site, which we happen to do that. Each property has the square footage right there. So we clearly want to start with the area. So I'm going to click area, and I could also type area. And then I want to divide that by 43,560. That is the square footage of an acre. And so this is going to give me the total number of acreage. Cool. And I type that in. Okay, look at that. Now, I don't necessarily want to see exactly to that degree. So I'm going to come into my units, formatting for acreage here, and then field format. I don't want to use default settings. I simply want to make sure this is fixed, and then set the number of decimal places to, let's do 2. I don't want 5 or 6. That's ridiculous. So, okay. Now that reads quite well. I can clearly see the square footage. I can see the acreage. That this is really helpful. And so what happens next? I mean, this is all, the cool thing is that this is static. We know this. But how might we leverage a bit more of the information in my massing here and then apply it to the properties? Now, it's going to be a little more static again, where I'm going to input some hard values. I don't like doing that just because the whole point of this is that things can change on the fly and this and that. So I would probably say that there's a point to which I think something like this would be better done with Dynamo because of the ease of access of updating parameters, of transferring data, things like that. We'll see about getting to that in the future. But just know that everything that I'm doing in not only this video, but the last couple would apply to Dynamo and could be applied to Dynamo in a way to where it's even easier than what we're doing here. So maybe what we want to do next is calculate the percentage of the area that my buildings are taking up on the property. Now, that seems to me very simple to do in a schedule, and it is, except of how we have these schedules work it out, they're not going to play nice together because we have each building broken out, and then at the same time we have the whole property built out separately, and that's fine. So the hard value that I'm talking about is that I'm going to pull the data, the area information from the levels, the level 1 levels of each of the properties, and then just add that into a calculated value. So what do we do there? Well, it's basically the exact same thing as we did with the acreage, except I'm going to trade out that acreage value, whatever that was, 43,560, instead place that with my calculated, basically level 1 area. And so let's go here. I'm going to pull up our handy dandy calculator because, heaven knows I won't remember this. So let's go ahead and look at level 1 here and then level 1 here. So this one is 6441. So 6441 plus 12350. Cool. So 18,791. So that is basically the level 1 area taken up by level 1 on property 1. So let's go to our properties here. And again, fields. This is going to be a one more calculated. And again, I'm going to start with the, you could say area. I'm not actually going to start with the area because we want a percentage. And you might think that we want to use percentage, but I don't want to use percentage because I'm not using multiple parameters. The two parameters that I'm using One of them I'm going to input myself as a hard value. So it will be a formula nonetheless. So let's do area percentage. That seems about right. Basically, the percentage of the area that my buildings are taking on the site. Or let's do building percentage. That seems to make more sense. And so my formula is, what percentage is that? And so we can come in here, and number will still make the most sense because ultimately that's what it is. We're calculating that. So we're going to take that 18,791, and then we're going to divide that by property one's area. Now, you can see where we're going to go wrong here, and that this may not be something that you want to do because you're going to have to update this all the time or make 3 parameters for it. So I'm going to go through with this, but just show you what it's doing. Come over here to area and click OK. So cool. We have this. Before we do that, I want to make sure that this is showing up as the correct percentage that we want. This is now going to be a percentage, and there will be, let's say, 2 allowable decimal places easily. There we go. And then finally, of course, we want the symbol to be %. Done. Okay. And so cool, look at this. We could see that it is taking up 40% of that site. And let's just look at the site to see if that makes sense. Well, in fact, that looks pretty good. It's about accurate. And in fact, it's supposedly exact. So where did I go wrong? Well, I went wrong in that every single one of these properties is now using that hard value specifically from property 1 to calculate all of the building percentages, based on the site. So what have we learned here? Well, there's a way that you can do this. We can call this property 1. What I'm doing is seeming like it's on the fly, but I'm trying to show you some of the things that you can do with schedules, but that you might have to end up breaking them out. That's not bad, which is what we're about to do. So simply what I do is I filter by one more time. Property actually does equal property 1, and so we can totally get everything that we want from property 1. So if you don't mind having multiple schedules, it is as simple as doing this. Now, let's go ahead and calculate the FAR, the floor area ratio. Well, that floor area is going to be, again, a hard value that is going to be found in the massing, which that hard value is going to be that 147.48. So with that, then I divide that by the total property area, and then we're good to go. So again, coming in here, I can add a calculated value. We're going to call this FAR. 147,480 is the value that we need to work with. And so, of course, we want to divide that by the area. And of course, add divide, you have to do that, of course. And so what do we get now? Well, we get this number, that is the FAR, but again, I probably want to present this in a slightly different way. Field format, it's still going to be I want to change this to fixed, and then maybe 2 decimal places. That works just fine. So look at this. This is a lot of information, and this is just property 1. Now, just know that the second I go ahead and change some of these, specifically level 1, but all the areas, I would have to take the areas of level 1 that I add up myself and the total area of all of the buildings on that site, on property 1, and then translate them back to get not only the building percentage, but the FAR updated on the schedule. That's not exactly what I want to have to do, which is where Dynamo can start to come in, but at the same time, this is really good data. Now, what do I do next? Well, I can just duplicate this, simply call this property 2, because hello, we're moving on here. And then instead of that, I'm going to filter this by property 2. Make sure we get property 2. So here we go, property 2. Obviously, again, I'm going to have to update the building percentage and the FAR values, the level 1 and the total building area from property 2 here, now 89,350. Update that into my property 2 schedule, which again isn't the end of the world, but it's not ideal. So I'm trying my best to give you a way that you can achieve a bunch of data and have it kind of at the end of your fingertips, but also like you're gonna have to work for it just a little bit. And that's the way it works with these multiple schedules, because the second you try and put all these into one schedule, it's not going to work. Now, what I've thought of doing in the past is having one giant property schedule and then having a building percentage for each one of the properties. In this case, hopefully you don't have too many, but then just know you have to ignore some of the fields because I don't know. There's tons of ways to do this. And I'm curious if you have a specific way that you've done this in the past, or if you found a better way of just dealing with all of this data, but nonetheless, we are getting a lot of data and we're able to manipulate it pretty well. Just know that you're going to have to deal with some of these fixed values. Either that or a Dynamo script would really help with that. And it wouldn't even necessarily help with solving our problems and being able to put all of this in one schedule, because that still wouldn't work. But it would be able to update these static values that I'm placing into the schedules a bit better. And you could also say that, yeah, I could put all of these into as parameters. I could totally do that, but that would be a ton of more parameters than really necessary. So this is where the video will end, because I have looked at taking the data that I have here in 3D and then translating it into multiple schedules, where I have not only the massing data here, as in the buildings, the garages, whatever is on my particular properties, with the areas added up and the heights and everything, but I've taken some data from it, and then apply that to specific properties, both 1 and 2, so we could see some of the things you might want to track, and just knowing, of course, that you're going to have to update some of them on the fly. So let me know what you think of this. I hope this has not been a waste of time for you, because there's a lot of data that we can get out of this, and a lot of manipulation that we can do to it, and still get all of this in real time, essentially. So let me know what you think of it. If you'd like to see this in Dynamo, that's definitely something I could look to do in the future. Just let me know if you'd like to do that. And if you happen to learn something, please demolish that like button. It really helps me out quite a lot. And that will do for this video. I will see you in the next Revit video. Have a wonderful day, and thank you very much for watching.